There's a wall in your life that you believe the world has built. A wall made of rejections, of doors that closed, of opportunities that didn't come. But if you look more closely, you'll realize this wall isn't outside. It's inside you. It was silently built over the years by experiences that left invisible scars, a harsh word that turned into a wound, a failure that crystallized into a limiting belief, a fear that began to guide your choices. Carl Jung said that the shadow contains what we reject in ourselves, and it is precisely this shadow that, without realizing it, you allow to build the walls that today prevent you from moving forward. The paradox is cruel and, at the same time, liberating. You seek freedom, but you are a prisoner in a cell of your own making. You constantly wish the world would stop holding you back, when, in fact, resistance stems from within. Marie-Louise von Franz reminds us that, often, the enemy we believe we face outside is merely a reflection of what we haven't integrated within ourselves. It's like fighting shadows projected on the wall, without realizing that the light that creates them comes from within. Imagine a bird that spent years in a cage. The door was always open, but it never dared to cross it. Not because it was truly trapped, but because it believed it was. This is how we are when we repeat the same internal narratives, without questioning where they came from. Fear disguises itself as security. Limitation disguises itself as reality. Repetition gives us a sense of familiarity, even if it hurts, even if it consumes the soul. And herein lies the promise of this journey, recognizing the invisible forces that have always been around you, not as enemies, but as invitations to expansion. Because nothing and no one, in fact, can stop you again when you realize that the true obstacle was never the other, never the world, never circumstances. The greatest obstacle has always been within, but it is precisely there that your liberation also lies. This video is an invitation. A call to look beyond the surface. To realize that the wall that holds you back can be dismantled, not with brute force, but with awareness, with presence, with the courage to look within. Today, you won't just hear words. You will feel, in each of them, the reminder that there has always been an open door within you. A door to the life that awaits on the other side of the shadow. If this message has resonated with you so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This way, you'll strengthen this space and help this reflection reach even more people. Have you ever noticed how, often, what holds us back most isn't something that comes from outside, but rather what we carry inside? It's as if we live in a constant dialogue with invisible voices that repeat, "You can't, you don't deserve it, it's not for you." These voices didn't arise from nothing. They formed slowly, from experiences, pain, and interpretations that, without realizing it, you transformed into absolute truths. They are unconscious voices that, disguised as reality, shape the way you see the world and yourself. The mind has a silent and sophisticated way of convincing us that the limit lies outside. But, in reality, it's as if we carry a cloudy lens before our eyes. It prevents us from seeing the real possibilities that are always there. When you believe the story that you can't, that you're not enough, or that something will always hold you back, this narrative transforms into a frequency, a vibration, an energy field that begins to attract experiences that confirm the same limitations. Be careful with the stories you repeat about yourself. They may seem like ordinary thoughts, but each repetition becomes a brick in an invisible wall. Think of someone who, after a failure, decides to say, "I'm unlucky, nothing works out for me." These phrases seem harmless, but each time they are repeated, they not only record an emotional memory in the brain but also reinforce neural connections that sustain the same pattern of failure. This is science confirming what spiritual wisdom already said: the internal narrative is the foundation of external reality. There is also a silent factor that sabotages your vibrational frequency. It's not obvious fear, it's not blatant pain, but that almost imperceptible internal message that slowly erodes your confidence. This factor is the inconsistency between what you desire and what you truly believe about yourself. You may want prosperity, love, freedom, but if deep down, without realizing it, you vibrate at the frequency of scarcity, exclusion, or powerlessness, then the energy you emit is misaligned. It's like trying to tune a radio station with the dial on the wrong frequency. No matter how much you turn up the volume, all you hear is noise. This is the invisible block. It doesn't scream, it doesn't seem obvious, but it governs choices, perceptions, and attitudes. It keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-sabotage that seems to have no end. And yet, when we become aware of it, something moves. It's like realizing that the cage door has been open all along. What once seemed like an external prison reveals itself as an internal pattern. And the simple act of seeing this is the first blow to the invisible wall. There's a silent force within us that always seems to act at the moment we most need to move forward. It's as if, just as we're about to cross an important threshold, something pulls us back. This something isn't the world, it isn't others, it isn't fate conspiring against us. It's the unconscious, which acts like a guardian. It fears the new, it fears change, it fears expansion, even when that change represents the possibility of a better life. The unconscious creates an ingenious mechanism. It convinces us that it's safe to remain in the known, even if that known is pain. It whispers that taking a step forward can bring greater risks than standing still. Thus, every time we're on the verge of a breakthrough, an invisible chain holds us back. We call this self-sabotage. And it's not an external enemy, but a distorted protection. The unconscious isn't trying to destroy us. It's simply trying to protect us from something it interprets as a threat, even if it's growth. Why do you sabotage yourself just when you're about to move forward? Because the human brain, programmed for survival, values security over fulfillment. It prefers the discomfort of familiarity to the risk of the unknown. This is why so many people stay in relationships that hurt them, in jobs that consume them, in routines that drain them. Not because they love these conditions, but because their unconscious system understands that it is less dangerous to repeat the familiar than to face the new. There is also a subtle illusion that reinforces this cycle. Dopamine, a substance linked to immediate pleasure, creates small rewards in superficial actions, giving us a false sense of progress. Have you ever noticed how you often feel busy, but don't make progress? How you accomplish small tasks but avoid the ones that truly matter? This is dopamine creating the illusion of movement. It makes us believe we are moving forward, when in reality, we are merely circling the same space, avoiding confronting what would truly help us grow. Self-sabotage is, therefore, an invisible enemy. It disguises itself as security, prudence, even productivity. But its true nature is fear of the unknown. Until we recognize this mechanism, we'll remain stuck in the same place, believing the world is blocking us, when in fact, it's our unconscious that's lifting the chains. Becoming aware of this is like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly, we realize what seemed like a huge monster was just a shadow projected on the wall. We often believe that others are responsible for our pain, that the world around us is persecuting us, that there is always someone or something preventing us from living fully. But what we rarely realize is that, in many of these moments, we are not fighting against reality, but against our own ghosts. We project onto others what we cannot recognize in ourselves. The fear we carry within finds expression in our neighbors, our bosses, our partners, even strangers. It's as if we are fighting external battles that, in fact, belong to our inner world. Carl Jung described projection as the inevitable tendency to see outside what we reject within. When we fail to recognize our anger, it becomes the other's flaw. When we fail to accept our fragility, it becomes another's weakness. And so we live at war, not because the world is hostile, but because we are blind to our own shadow. It is an unconscious but powerful process, capable of distorting our relationships, eroding our trust, and distancing us from authenticity. The mind projects because it can't bear the idea of facing certain internal contents. The unconscious prefers to place on the outside what is too painful to admit. It's easier to believe the problem lies in someone else's behavior than to face our own open wounds. But this detour doesn't free us. On the contrary, it imprisons us in a cycle of resentment, hurt, and escape from ourselves. It's a prison with no visible bars, only distorted reflections. Imagine how many different bonds could be if we saw people as they truly are, without the veils of projection. How many arguments, how many disappointments, how many ruptures would be avoided if we were aware that part of what we judge doesn't belong to the other person, but to ourselves? It's as if we were on a battlefield shrouded in fog, shooting at enemies that don't exist, while the real fight remains within us. Projection, when unacknowledged, keeps the cycle of self-sabotage alive. Because as long as we believe the obstacle lies outside, we never seek the keys to liberation within. We remain trapped in the illusion that by changing others, we will be free. But liberation lies not in shaping the external world, it lies in illuminating the dark corners of our own soul. Only when we recognize that these ghosts are ours can we dissolve them. And in this recognition begins true reconciliation, not with others, but with ourselves. The body holds secrets that the mind tries to forget. Every contracted muscle, every persistent pain, every shallow breath is a living memory of something unresolved within us. When words fail to express, the body speaks. It becomes the silent stage where our repressed emotions present themselves, day after day, asking to be seen, asking to be acknowledged. How many times have you felt a weight in your chest for no apparent reason? How many times has your throat tightened as if something wanted to escape but couldn't find a way? How many times has your back ached not from physical exertion, but from the invisible burden of carrying expectations, guilt, and fears? The body doesn't lie. It translates into sensations what the mind often prefers to hide. Neuroscience shows that our emotional experiences don't just remain in our psychological memory. They leave biological marks, networks of connections that influence our chemistry, our heartbeat, our posture. When we ignore our emotional pain, the body takes it over, as if to say, if you don't look at this, I'll remind you. This is why we so often seek out doctors to cure symptoms, without realizing that the root lies in the invisible, in what has not been emotionally processed. Practical spirituality, in turn, has long understood this connection. Ancient traditions spoke of the vital energy that circulates through the body, of the blockages that arise when emotions become paralyzed, of the need to harmonize what we feel with what we think. Today, science is beginning to translate into data what these traditions already intuited. There is no real separation between mind and body, between emotion and matter. We are a living unity, and everything we feel has repercussions on our biology. The body is, therefore, a compassionate mirror. It doesn't punish us, it warns us. It doesn't chastise us, it guides us. Every tension can be seen as a whisper from the unconscious, every recurring pain is a call to return to ourselves. And when we learn to listen to this silent dialogue, we discover that the body is not only a vehicle, but also a guide. It shows us the places where we have not yet reconciled ourselves, where the shadow still needs light. Within each of us lies a force that yearns to open up and trust, but also a guardian that erects walls. This guardian is the fear of surrender. It presents itself as distrust, as control, as the need to always have an escape plan. It is the fear of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, of lowering our defenses and being seen in our most intimate and human ways. This fear doesn't arise out of nowhere. It is built from the scars of life. Often, when we surrendered in the past, we were hurt. When we trusted, we were betrayed. When we loved with an open heart, we felt the pain of loss or rejection. And so, silently, the unconscious taught us that it is safer to keep our distance, that it is less painful to control than to surrender. Neuroscience shows that vulnerability activates regions of the brain linked to survival. It's as if, when we open up, our body sounds an alarm, danger, you could get hurt again. But at the same time, these same regions are activated when we experience genuine love, deep connection, and belonging. Risk and reward are intertwined, and fear arises precisely from this intertwining. Practical spirituality reminds us that the fear of surrender is, in essence, the fear of losing control. It's the illusion that if we hold the reins of everything, we'll be protected. But in truth, life will always remind us that we don't have absolute control. The greatest transformations happen precisely when we stop resisting, when we allow something greater to guide us, when we accept that surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of trust in our own existence. This fear, therefore, doesn't need to be fought with force, but understood with compassion. It is proof that we still care, that we still desire connection, even if we try to deny it. Surrender is a risk, yes, but it is also the only path to a fulfilling life. Without it, we remain locked in internal fortresses, protected but alone. With it, we discover that pain may exist, but beauty, depth, and true freedom only blossom when we dare to open our hearts again. Loneliness doesn't begin in the silence of an empty room, nor in the distance between you and others. It originates earlier, in a deeper, almost imperceptible place, in the intimate feeling of not being truly understood. It's the invisible wound that opens when you realize no one sees what's happening inside you, that your pain finds no echo, that your words are lost in the air. This invisible root feeds on experiences that often seem small at first glance, when you shared something important and were ignored, when you expressed an emotion and were judged, when you tried to be yourself and were not accepted. Little by little, these memories accumulate and build the belief that perhaps it's safer to remain silent, to hide, to adapt. And thus arises the loneliness that doesn't depend on the absence of people, but on the absence of authentic connection. Neuroscience shows that our brains are wired for connection. So-called mirror neurons are responsible for allowing us to feel what others feel, to empathize, to share experiences. But when we grow up in environments where there's no room for this genuine exchange, these circuits become underutilized, and the mind learns to protect itself through isolation. Not because we want to, but because it seems less painful than facing rejection over and over again. Practical spirituality reminds us that loneliness, at its deepest level, is not just the absence of others, but a separation from ourselves. When we don't feel seen, we often also fail to see ourselves. We repeat to ourselves the same indifference we receive from others. The emptiness widens because we forget that the first connection must be born within, in the simple act of allowing ourselves to feel, recognize, and embrace our own existence. The invisible root of loneliness isn't broken by trying to fill the void with distractions or superficial company. It transforms when, little by little, you find spaces, internal and external, where you can show yourself without masks. Where you can exist exactly as you are, without needing to justify, without needing to conquer. It is in this terrain that loneliness ceases to be a prison and becomes fertile ground for the blossoming of true connection. Memories are not just records of the past, they are energy pulsating in the present. Every memory, every experience we carry, leaves deep impressions on our bodies and minds. Some present themselves as comfort, as learning experiences. Others, however, linger as silent burdens, shaping our choices, limiting our courage, keeping us trapped in repetitive patterns without us even realizing it. How many times have you caught yourself reacting intensely to something that, rationally, should no longer matter? How many times have you felt fear, anger, or sadness about something that happened years ago, as if it were still happening now? This is the weight of unprocessed memories, stored in the unconscious, influencing our perception of the present, like invisible chains that restrict the freedom of the soul. Neuroscience shows that the brain creates strong synapses for emotionally charged events. What was traumatic, unfair, or painful remains intensely accessible, even if the conscious mind tries to ignore it. The body also remembers the tension, the backache, the tightness in the throat, the tightness in the chest. Each sensation is an echo of memories that have not yet been embraced. Practical spirituality teaches us that the past is not a sentence. It is a map of where we have been and how we have been shaped, but it does not need to dictate the future. It is possible to look at these memories, feel their presence, acknowledge the pain they carry, and still allow life to continue flowing. It is not about erasing what happened, but about transforming the weight into learning, integrating what was previously fragmented. The silent weight of memories disappears when we stop fighting it and begin to understand its message. Each painful memory can be transformed into compassionate alertness, into inner strength, into awareness. What once limited us now serves as a guide. Freedom comes not from forgetting, but from integration. And, by realizing this, we begin to walk without the burden we carry, with lighter steps, with a more open heart, and with the perception that nothing, nor anyone, will ever be able to stop us when we become aware of the chains that once held us back. There is a frequency that every human being emits, an invisible field that reflects the internal state of their mind, body, and soul. The law of resonance reminds us that we don't attract what we desire with intention alone, but rather what vibrates in a way that is compatible with our inner self. If there is misalignment, if there is a contradiction between what we feel and what we desire, the world sends back echoes that reinforce this dissonance. How many times have you desired something intensely, but it seemed the universe didn't respond? This isn't a punishment. It's simply a reflection of your frequency. Desiring without realizing it, asking without integrating, seeking without aligning your internal energy produces superficial results, silent frustration, and cycles of trial and error. It's the paradox of manifestation. What we want doesn't arrive because we don't yet vibrate in tune with what we ask for. Many believe that positive thinking or visualization is enough to make wishes come true. But neuroscience explains that the brain responds to internal coherence. When there is conflict between emotion and thought, between belief and desire, the body releases contradictory signals that generate resistance, anxiety, and internal sabotage. Resonance isn't magic, it's a natural reflection of aligned or misaligned energy. Practical spirituality reminds us that the external world is a mirror. If your life seems full of frustration, the invitation isn't to change others, but to observe your own vibrational state. Adjusting thoughts, integrating emotions, releasing old memories, aligning intention and action, this is how frequency transforms, and this is how resonance begins to return compatible opportunities, profound encounters, and genuine experiences. When we understand the law of resonance, every step becomes conscious. Every decision, every emotion, every thought begins to be perceived as part of a larger pattern that influences reality. The secret isn't asking for more, but in deeply tuning into internal coherence. And by doing so, the world no longer blocks you. It becomes an echo of who you truly are. Nothing and no one will be able to stop your progress, because the strength that was once scattered now resonates with clarity, integrity, and power. We often get lost in the idea that being spiritual is about accumulating rituals, pretty words, and outward appearances. Performative spirituality creates the illusion of progress without transformation, of connection without presence, of light without awareness. It's donning a mask that convinces the world, and often even ourselves, that we are evolving, when in reality we remain trapped in old patterns and invisible limitations. The danger of this path is subtle. It teaches us to look outward, for external signs and approval, instead of delving into what truly matters, the recognition of what lives within us. We follow ready-made formulas, repeated mantras, and superficial practices, believing that change happens simply because the gesture was made. But the body, mind, and soul know the difference. The energy remains misaligned, the shadow remains hidden, and the invisible wall remains standing. Neuroscience shows that without emotional coherence and true engagement, the brain fails to create new synapses of transformation. Mechanical repetition doesn't alter old patterns, it doesn't reconnect traumatic memories, it doesn't unlock accumulated tensions. Performative spirituality works like a painted canvas, beautiful from a distance, but what lies beneath remains intact. True spirituality emerges when each gesture is felt, when each word is integrated, when the gaze turns inward with honesty. It's accepting that progress isn't in appearance, but in the depth of experience. It's acknowledging the shadow, embracing pain, observing thoughts without identifying with them. It's transforming repressed energy into presence, blockage into clarity, fear into understanding. The trap of performance teaches us, however, something precious: we can choose the path of authenticity. When we let go of the need to impress, to prove, to appear, we begin to live in true resonance. Consciousness expands, frequency harmonizes, and, for the first time, we realize that nothing and no one can stop us when transformation comes from within. The external ceases to be a mirror of lack and begins to reflect the internal integrity we've already achieved. The shadow is not an enemy. It is an essential part of who we are, composed of fears, rejections, repressed desires, and unacknowledged emotions. For a long time, we learned to deny this part of ourselves, to hide it, to project it onto others. But Jung taught us that true strength does not come from denial, but from integration. It is when we turn to the shadow with courage and compassion that we find vital energy that was previously blocked, repressed, and wasted. The integrated shadow does not transform us into dark beings. It restores us wholeness. By accepting and understanding the hidden contents of the psyche, every repressed impulse, every unlived emotion, every fragment of ourselves that previously seemed dangerous becomes a source of insight, creativity, and personal power. The energy that was previously consumed in fighting against oneself begins to fuel conscious actions, more authentic choices, and deeper relationships. When we recognize what we reject in ourselves, our external reflections change. What once seemed threatening, other people's behavior, life's challenges, unexpected situations, loses its power of control. The world continues to unfold, but interpretation and reaction are different. It's as if a light is turned on in the dark corners of the mind, transforming imaginary monsters into silent guides for conscious action. Integrating the shadow requires patience and attention. It's not about eliminating feelings or hiding imperfections, but about observing, embracing, and understanding its messages. Every repressed impulse contains information about limits, desires, and unmet needs. When this energy is recognized, it ceases to act as sabotage and transforms into a transformative force. The integrated shadow is, therefore, the key to inner freedom. It is the place where the courage to be whole, the clarity to perceive hidden patterns, and the ability to act with presence reside. And when the shadow is embraced, we realize that nothing external, no circumstance, no other being, can prevent us from living fully. True power lies not in controlling the world, but in mastering ourselves. Life isn't measured solely in hours, minutes, or seconds. There is a deeper rhythm that pulses within us, a time that belongs to the soul, not to the clock. This internal time follows its own cycles, aligned with processes of maturation, healing, learning, and expansion. When we try to accelerate these natural rhythms, we resist the flow of existence and subject ourselves to silent frustrations. Modern society teaches us that everything must be fast, immediate, and measurable. But not every true transformation can be timed. Emotional growth, the integration of the shadow, the recognition of repressed memories, the reconnection with one's essence, all of this demands patience and presence. Trying to force the soul's time through the external clock is like trying to speed up a tree to bloom out of season. The result is suffering, anxiety, and a sense of powerlessness. Nature offers us silent lessons about vibrational patience. Each cycle, each season, each phase of life has its own rhythm that cannot be ignored. Just as a river finds its way around rocks, just as a seed germinates at the right moment, the soul also moves in its own time. When we learn to respect this cadence, we realize that progress is not linear, but consistent. Each step, no matter how small, contributes to the complete journey. Aligning the soul's time with the clock's time is a delicate art. It means allowing life to unfold unhurriedly, yet without apathy. It means feeling each moment and, at the same time, understanding the greater flow that guides all experiences. It means transforming anxiety into presence, impatience into observation, urgency into trust in one's own rhythm. When we tune into the soul's time, everything changes. Difficulties lose some of their weight, decisions become clearer, and the coherence between desire and action is strengthened. The external world remains fast-paced, but within us a firm and profound calm emerges. A sense that, finally, nothing and no one can stop us when we learn to walk in time with our own hearts. There was a moment in her life when everything seemed immutable. Each day was a repetition of the previous one, each attempt at change ended in silent frustration. Fear, doubt, and a sense of powerlessness were constant companions. She believed the obstacles came from outside, that the world conspired against her desires, when, in fact, it was the invisible walls she had built that kept her stuck. The turning point came not with grand revelations, but with small, profound insights. Gradually, she began to notice repeating patterns, emotions that arose without explanation, repressed impulses that manifested subtly but persistently. Recognizing these internal marks was like lighting a candle in a dark room. Everything was still there, but now it could be seen, understood, and transformed. The insight that changed everything was not just intellectual, but profoundly sensory. She felt that the outside world ceased to be an enemy when she realized that the blocks, fears, and limitations were within. Every external challenge reflected an internal resistance, every uncomfortable situation revealed something unintegrated within herself. By facing these truths, she realized that the energy previously consumed in fighting the world could be redirected toward creation, action, and conscious presence. Over time, what seemed impossible began to manifest naturally. Relationships transformed, professional choices gained clarity, and the feeling of being at the mercy of circumstances was replaced by a quiet, profound confidence. Nothing had changed in the external world, but everything had changed within her. What once paralyzed her now became fuel for her progress. This story shows that real transformation doesn't depend on removing external obstacles, but on recognizing and integrating internal ones. When this happens, each step becomes firm, each decision aligned, each movement conscious. The freedom that seemed distant emerges silently, powerfully, and irrevocably, revealing that nothing and no one can stop someone who has learned to look within and listen to their own truth. The self is not merely an idea, nor a distant goal. It is the totality of the psyche, the silent synthesis of every experience, every emotion, every shadow recognized and integrated. Reconnecting with the self is realizing that everything that once seemed fragmented, fears, desires, repressed memories, old pains, is now part of a single consciousness that observes, understands, and embraces. Throughout the journey, every external obstacle, every emotional blockage, every internal challenge has served as a guide for this moment. The self does not reveal itself in haste, nor is it conquered by force. It emerges when there is the courage to look within, to face what seemed unbearable, to recognize that nothing external has power over inner freedom. Jung reminds us that integration is key. When the shadow is accepted and the internal energy is harmonized, the self manifests in its fullness, silent, firm, and unstoppable. Subtle signs indicate that the approach to the self is taking place. There is a sense of quiet clarity, as if the mind were aligned with the heart. There are decisions that no longer generate anxiety, because they arise from a place of inner certainty. There is a sense of freedom that does not depend on external circumstances, other people's approval, or control over the world. It is a freedom that comes from within, unshakable, profound, and constant. The metaphor is powerful, like a warrior facing a dragon he believed to be external, but which, upon approaching, he realizes is part of himself. The treasure was not protected by external forces, but by the illusion that it was impossible to access. And when we finally understand that the dragon is part of us, that the shadow is ours, that invisible walls can always be overcome, we discover that nothing and no one can anymore impede our path. Rediscovering the self is, therefore, the synthesis of the entire journey. It does not eliminate obstacles, but allows us to cross them with presence, awareness, and courage. Each challenge becomes an opportunity, each difficulty transforms into a learning experience, each step is a conscious movement toward complete freedom. It is in this deep, silent, and firm space that we realize, nothing external can stop us when we look within and find ourselves whole. Nothing external can stop someone who has recognized and integrated their own shadow. Every difficulty, every fear, every internal resistance no longer has the power to imprison when it has been understood, embraced, and transformed. Jung reminds us that true freedom is not achieved externally, but within ourselves, in the profound silence where we find our wholeness. Robert A. Johnson shows us that true power arises when we stop running from ourselves and face what seemed unbearable. There is no need to fight the world, to prove something to others, or to control every outcome. What seemed enormous and impossible was often just a projection of what we had not yet recognized within ourselves. By integrating the shadow, the energy that was previously used for resistance transforms into life force, clarity, and presence. The metaphor of the warrior and the dragon illustrates this journey. The dragon that guarded the treasure was part of himself. The fear, pain, and blockages were always within, not without. Recognizing this is not a loss of power, but rather an awakening to the deepest truth. The greatest obstacle has always been looking within, and the greatest liberation arises when we do. Awakening this awareness means understanding that life remains full of challenges, but none of them will be able to stop us when we are whole. Every step, every choice, every breath becomes an expression of the freedom we have achieved. What seemed impossible becomes possible, not because the world has changed, but because we have changed the way we exist within it. The journey from shadow to freedom is not a straight line, not an effortless path. But it is the journey that transforms fear into courage, pain into learning, and blockage into vital energy. When we look within and find our own strength, we realize that nothing and no one can ever stop us from moving forward. True freedom arises the moment we become whole, conscious, and integral. And it is in this silent plenitude that life finally unfolds as it should, vast, profound, and absolutely ours. If this journey resonated with you, please support this work by liking and subscribing to the channel. This way, you'll help keep this exchange alive and allow more people to access these reflections. Until next time.